In each Masters of Beautiful Achievements Academy episode, Alexander Prinsen interviews guests about how solutions inspired by nature can provide sustainable opportunities for our future challenges. Since 2013, he is globally researching sustainable business models and innovations. To share his findings, he founded the Masters of Beautiful Achievements Academy.
In today's podcast, I will talk with Prof Ille Gebeshuber about biomimetics, nanotechnology, and tribiology. I met Ille during my MBA journey when I visited Malaysia, where she taught me how nature's wisdom is full of surprises and how we have so much to learn from nature. At the moment, she is a physics professor with a high fascination on how nature solves any of its challenges. She works for the Vienna University of Technology as a tenured associate professor. She was professor at the Institute of Microengineering and Nanoelectronics at the National University of Malaysia, where she shared her passion for the Malaysian rainforest through her now famous TED Talk. Besides that, she's also an exceptional writer on a broad range of topics, including science fiction. It is a really great honor to have you with us today, Ille.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We met each other in Malaysia, where I had the privilege to spend some time with you.
Yeah.
And the topic that still resonates with me is the way you talked about the natural world and what you've experienced. And you work in a very specific area of biology. They call it biomimetics. Can you share us a little bit more what it entails and what you can do with it?
Yeah, so what you're doing when you're doing biomimetics is that you learn from living nature for better applications in technology, in engineering, in the arts, in the sciences. This work, this biomimetics work, is not a specialist work, it's a generalist work, or it's an interdisciplinary team approach. So you need to have people from physics, from engineering, from mathematics, from biology, from economy, and working together, looking at living nature and learning from living nature for how to make your own things better. I will give you an example. One example is physical pesticides versus chemical pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, we use a lot of chemical pesticides, and not just the insects we want to fight, die, but also the bees are harmed, the babies are harmed, the soil is polluted, the air is polluted, and it's not very good in general. This is the chemical pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
With physical pesticides inspired by wax crystals, which are secreted by certain plants, we can approach species-specific insects and fight them off the plants where we do not want to have them without any harm to others. If we look at grapes, if we look at banana leaves, if we look at plums, all these plants have this silvery whitish layer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at this silvery whitish layer with a high resolution microscope, for example, a scanning electron microscope, you would see that this is little wax crystals. Now, these wax crystals are not at all toxic. Children can eat grapes, we can eat the plums without any problems. What a mathematician friend of mine, an applied mathematician from the university in Cardiff in Wales, found out is that the size and the fracture behavior of these wax crystals is tuned so that especially the insects who want to eat this certain plant do not want to crawl over this plant because the crystals enter their adhesive pads on their legs and it's not nice for them, it's not convenient for them to walk there, so they stop landing there, they stop walking there. And so different plants have crystals of different sizes and different breakage characteristics to attack certain different types of insects. And this, of course, would be fabulous to replace the chemical pesticides that we currently use.
This sounds like the solution we need for our agriculture. But do you also imply that plants have different waxes for different species?
Well, in biomimetics, it's very often the case that the material is by far not as important as the structure of the material.
Oh, okay.
So living nature in many cases uses materials which are cheap to produce, which are easy to produce, but they are structured in amazing forms which have certain functionalities which wouldn't be reached by the material alone. And this is a very distinct difference to the technological materials which we people are currently using. We are using a wide range of different materials to achieve the functionalities we need, whereas in living nature, you very often just have a limited amount of different materials which are slightly chemically altered but greatly structurally varied. And so you can achieve functionalities in absolutely harmless materials, which would, when the plant or the animal or the microorganism is dead, then serve as food or as fertilizer for other organisms.
Yeah, eventually nothing gets wasted. That's how nature
Yes.
operates. It really reminds me, I think there was a recent research on a dragonfly that they found the surface or the surface on the body of the dragonfly. It has actually the same kind of structure, that it doesn't carry any microbes because the cell structure gets disrupted, broken down.
Totally disrupted.
That is so amazing that he's basically you call it bacteria free.
Yes.
Because his structure is doesn't allow bacteria to actually survive on its surface.
It's just amazing. Yeah.
And what does the word biomimatics mean as a definition?
Well, bio comes from biology and mimetics comes from mimesis, which means you look at biology, you cannot copy it, you cannot take it as a blueprint, but you can understand the deep principles and transfer them to engineering. One example, very famous, is the Lotus leaf effect. You know that the Lotus leaf is pure, is sacred for the Buddhists because it's never dirty, it's always clean. And Professor Bartlett from Germany, the botanist, he found out that it's not a perfectly flat surface, but it's a surface with vaginations. And on these vaginations, you have wax crystals, and on the wax crystals, you have even smaller wax crystals. So water, which comes to this lotus leaf, does not wet the lotus leaf, but stays in a round ball. And then when you slightly tilt the lotus leaf, the water would run off and would take all the impurities, all the dirt particles, dust particles with it. And inspired from this, we can construct technical surfaces. They do not have to be water surface, lotus leaf surface material, but they just need to reproduce this hierarchical structure, and you could transfer the functionalities. And this is so amazing because normally biological materials would not be very usable in our technological world because they are easy to destroy, they are easy to disintegrate and things like this. But we can transfer these surface. In many cases, it's surface properties. We can transfer these surface properties also to other materials. But of course, in this case, sorry to interrupt, Alex, in this case, we always need to be careful that we only transfer good properties, because these biological surfaces, they are so integrated, they are so multifunctional, that in some cases, when we do not have this biological surface, but another surface, we might import properties which we do not want to have at all in our technological surface. For example, these plant crystals, these wax crystals, they are not toxic when microstructured. However, if we would micro and nanostructure certain of our technological materials, they might become very poisonous. So we need to be very careful, and we need to have a basic understanding of what we are doing. That's very important.
Yes, and while you're talking that, I had like something popped up, and I was like, paint, and if we could paint in this way, then
yes.
But then again, your last point is like, yeah, but humans tend to make paint from a very specific material, and most of the time it has unintended consequences, and suddenly it becomes toxic.
Yeah, so we need to be careful and we need to think. This is why biomimetics is also such an interesting field, because you need to understand biology and you need to understand technology and engineering and combine these two for an amazing outcome. Because, you know, some of the functionalities we see in living nature, we still cannot even start to reproduce with our technological approaches, with current technological approaches. So this living nature, materials, structures, and processes in living nature are like a treasure chest from which we can learn.
Yeah, and when we were together, you mentioned that you're also working in a very specific field called tribiology.
Yes.
Could you explain us more about this very unique research area?
Well, tribology is similar to biomimetics, a system science.
Mm-hmm.
It's the science of surfaces, interacting surfaces in relative motion. So whenever you have two parts sliding or rolling against each other or moving against each other, you have tribological properties. Be it when you blink with your eye, when you write with chalk on the blackboard, when the wheel is going over the asphalt, when motors, when gears are moving against each other. You know, in all these cases, you have tribological phenomena. And also when it comes to tribology, of course, we can learn a lot from living nature. One example is if we look at our lung, our alveoli, the little bubbles in our lung, their surface is covered with a monomolecular lubricant layer, which lets them slide against each other so that we can easily breathe, even in strong, in cold, in harsh conditions. And from these monomolecular lubricant layers in living nature, we can learn how to lubricant our tiny little new machines. Because sometimes our nano machines, our micro machines are so small that they're much smaller than a droplet of lubricant. So we cannot drop lubricant on these machines. We need to cover the parts with this monomolecular lubricant layer where the molecules are, you know, ordered, and where the single atoms in the molecules also contribute to the tribological properties, reducing friction, increasing adhesion, reducing adhesion, whatever you want with your approaches.
And I can assume then that the mechanical systems are operating on such a different level than you would have in a normal human engine. I mean, I'm comparing it to an ant. Ant can lift 10 times its weight, but because it's so small, a human cannot lift 10 times its own weight.
Yes. So we can achieve, of course, also amazing functionalities if we look at these micro and nano machines and their tribology on this scale. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, I'm learning again so much. And you're also working with the algae species Diatoms.
Yes.
What makes them so special?
Well, I'm absolutely in love with diatoms. They are organisms which biomineralize hydrated silica at ambient conditions. So to speak, they are building themselves a house of glass to live in. And they build this house of glass, they're single-celled organisms, not just in warm rivers or warm seas or lakes, but also in the polar regions. So even at 0 degrees salt water, where, you know, because of the salt, the water is still fluid, they are building their houses of glass. And the diatoms, they have beautiful shapes. There are hundreds of thousands of different species, which all look different. And they got me started to look into this area, which is called biomineralization, which means that organisms are building minerals, metals, alloys, composites, very fancy materials, but with water-based chemistry at ambient conditions in functional form, which is absolutely amazing. So sometimes you have star-like features, sometimes you have skeletons, sometimes you have, like our teeth. You know, just think, Alex, the baby has 37 degrees body temperature and is biomineralizing these amazing teeth, which are much better in quality than the biominerals of a mug, because the mug easily breaks and the tooth of a child takes much more time and much more, you know, fracture force to even start to break. And so to look at these natural materials, we can learn how to make our man-made materials even better.
So we can completely invite the porcelain industry that they can reduce their energy consumption drastically if they figure this one out.
Yes.
That's amazing. And I'm even hearing that, I don't know if that's because of the silicium, that you can use diatoms for painting.
Yes, they are used in many applications because they are nanostructured and microstructured. They're used as filters for beer and apple juice. They're used in dynamite because of the pores, you know,
Oh, really?
Yes, dynamite is a mixture of diatoms and nitroglycerin. And of course also in paints, because, you know, they have these beautiful structures which would scatter the light. And so you have very nice whitish appearance.
Yeah, I learned, I don't know how I came up to them, but even in Sweden there is a the solar industry is looking at diatoms.
Well, yes, I do not know in which direction the people in Sweden are looking, but the diatoms, they have surface functionalities, optical surface functionalities, which would help to focus the light on the chloroplasts. So just imagine you live in a glass house, you are a single-celled plant, so you need to make photosynthesis, and the glass house can be really thick in some cases, some tens or hundreds of, no, not hundreds, yeah, but tens of micrometers thick. So the light would, you know, not be as strong in the cell as outside. So they were working on, or they have developed some very, very fancy light focusing devices. Yeah.
So, and I mean, and I think I'm now teaching at the agriculture school in Leeuwarden, Hall, and there was one of these specialists on algae who told me that diatoms and algae in particular produce like 50% of the worldwide oxygen.
Yeah, so they are at the basis of the food chain, and they're producing a lot of the oxygen we need to survive. Yes.
So by harvesting, by breeding diatoms, we produce oxygen, and when their end of life is ready, we can use them in our paint and.
For example, yes.
But that's interesting, as that we just can combine two functionalities of a species and do good at the same time. That was exciting.
Yeah.
I think one of the things what you take out when you watch your TED talk from the Malaysian, I can watch that over and over again. Last time I showed it to my girlfriend and she was like, "Oh, this is amazing. This is so nice." What is your experience when you take people out to nature, and especially to you call it a jungle like in Malaysia?
Yeah.
What happens with people?
Yeah, well, they are mesmerized. You know, in Malaysia, like in many other countries, the youth is spending lots of its time in shopping centers, which have air conditioned, which are cooled down, and where you have all the fancy shops and coffee houses and things to enjoy and, you know, to meet your friends and to live your life. It's very nice, it's very beautiful, but one thing is not there very much, which is living nature. So you do not see many animals, you do not see many plants, and you do not see very much the connection between plants and animals, and that it actually all goes in circles. And so what I love to do is, I love to re-establish between kids or young people or people in general, this band of love between them and living nature, by taking them out to the forest, by showing them butterflies, plants, animals, and help them reconnect with this amazing and beautiful world out there. And so one of the first things which we realize, for example, in Malaysia, where it's very, very hot outside, is when you're walking on the concrete, on the asphalt, it's hot, it's humid, it's nearly impossible to bear. And then you enter the forest, and then the first thing you realize, it's silent and it's cool, because you have wind there and the plants are cooling the air, and it's just a completely different environment. It's so serene. And then the people look around and they see all these green things, and they are kind of intimidated because they do not know really what to do in there. And then I point out some certain aspects to them. For example, a little plant which is growing up the branch or the trunk of a large tree up towards the sun, and I ask them, how do the plants know where is up, where is down, in which direction to grow? How do they attach to the bark of the tree so that they do not fall down? How do they, interact with the tree? And then we, for example, see some spider silk, and I tell them spider silk has a higher tensile strength than steel. How does a spider produce this silk? I tell them that they have two little producing places on their body, and where the fluids come out, and only when the fluids come together, they harden to become spider silk. And then we see, for example, some snail shells, and I tell them, look at this. This is calcium carbonate built by animals, built by snails. How do they do it? And not just that they build the calcium carbonate, but also that they build it in this beautiful snail shell-like form. So it's like a walk through a wonderland where nothing has this money tag on it, and where the interactions work on a completely different level than is done in our current economic society.
And what is happening to these people you take along? What
is happening with them? Their eyes get wide open. They are amazed. They start to reconnect with nature. They start to see it as inspiration. And what I see in many of them, and what is for me the largest present, is that they start to respect life again. I think we can only move forward all together, plants, animals, microorganisms, and people here on this planet, if we care for each other and if we look after each other. And I think by reconnecting to living nature, we reinstall this respect for life, for us and for the others. And I think this then helps people to develop positive technologies which are not bad for the environment or for plants or animals, but good.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I explain all these examples to business people, and everybody is becoming aware that things need to change, and especially the value chain, and where we get our stuff from and where our stuff goes to. And once you explain how nature works, you're like, okay, nobody taught me this before. How do I move forward? There is with a lot of people, it's basically when you get amazed about nature, you realize you need to unlearn a lot of what you've been learned, because that does not fit to the experience you're having. And then they look forward. It's like, okay, but now what is the next step? What tools do I need? How do I grasp this? Have you any suggestions on how to approach that?
Well, there are now several biomimetics courses popping up all around the world, where especially this group is targeted. So, for example, in Austria, in Kufstein, there's going to be a bio-inspired engineering master course, which can only be attended by people who already work in a company. So the company funds them this master course. It takes place on the weekend, and I think every 6 or 8 weeks there's 4 or 5 days lecture also during the week, so that they learn this approach or this way of viewing the world, and that they bring back their expertise back to their companies and back to their enterprises. And I think that's a very good start. It's a very good approach, because in the course they have teachers from not just from biology, but also from, you know, marketing and engineering and things like this. And so they combine their economic thinking with learning from nature.
Yeah, because that's interesting, because I'm explaining people, once we understand the logic of the house, we understand the management of the house. And everybody sees that the management of the house is not functioning.
Exactly.
But that's because we do not understand the logic.
Yeah.
And to understand the logic, we have to understand the 5 kingdoms of nature and dive much deeper into that.
Yeah.
How did you end up in this field? Because if it's working in physics and then moving into biology is not, you would normally generally say, normal.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your, how did you end up in this business?
Well, it all started with a mathematics professor at whom I attended a lecture, and he told us about the inner ear. And he told us about the receptor cells in the inner ear, which are the cells which transform the mechanical sound signal, you know, as it travels through the air, into electrical signals, spikes, which go up through the auditory nerve to your brain. And these receptor cells, he told us, at the threshold of their sensitivity, so the smallest deflections of the sensory hairs are just 0.2 nanometers, which means when you would blow up the height of these hairs to the height of the Eiffel Tower, you have to move the width of the tip, or the tip of the Eiffel Tower, by the width of one thumb. And this is the threshold for hearing. So it's so amazingly exact that I thought, wow, I need to have a look in much more detail at biology, because I think this is not wet and slimy and disgusting, but this is at times machines with molecular precision, perfect cyclic integration of products and waste and production and usage, and so on and so forth. And the more I learned about biology, the more I was stunned by this absolutely fascinating world which is out there. And I thought it's also for physics a great addition if you dive into this world. And so I was really amazed when I found out that biomimetics is something which a couple of people are doing in this world, and that, well, I'm one of them.
And that was actually a math teacher showing you nature. That is interesting.
Yeah.
How that works. And one other thought I'm having, in the beginning you mentioned that you work with extremely multidisciplinary teams.
Yeah.
What is the main reason for that?
Well, the main reason for that is that everybody brings in an own way of thinking. And I think this is so inspiring, because especially if you go to living nature, you need to look at it with open eyes and from different angles. And so if you come with people like in my teams in Malaysia, from veterinary science, from biology, from physics, from engineering, from mathematics, from architecture, and all of them have on this jungle expedition their specific problem they want to attack, they want to address at the back of their head. And they are asking different questions to living nature. And when you then start to talk with each other, in the night, in the evening, when you sit together, when you drink a cup of tea, you realize that you can also learn a lot from each other and from these different angles of viewing living nature. So it's a very interdisciplinary approach, which is also beneficial for all the others.
So, and then again, biodiversity is also with the way humans are. You need you need all the angles to solve all our challenges.
Exactly.
To conclude, Ille, what recommendation would you have for people who want to dive deeper into biomimetics? What kind of books or people should they follow if they want to learn more?
I think they should, in the first instances, really try to go out, watch what is alive out there. And if it's just a little patch of moss growing, where the air condition is dripping on a concrete floor. And if they go there with a biologist or somebody with biology education, they can be taught by these people a lot. So that this world, this bunch of flowers starts to bloom for them. And then they would identify what they like most. It could be a horse, it could be a cow, it could be a diatom, it could be anything, because I think in principle we can learn from each and every organism. So to identify the one they really like most, and then ask this organism the questions they want to ask. And there are biologists who are ready at hand to work in this transfer process from biology to engineering to applications. And I think by doing some of these courses, and I also offer such courses, I go with people not just to the rainforest, but also to the normal forest in Austria and Germany, to the meadows, to some places in the city where some little plants are allowed to grow, because everywhere there we can see what is inspiring. And if the eye or if the brain has started to look in this way, then it's easier to appreciate what they learn from biomimetics books or lectures or videos or things like this. But I think the first thing is really to appreciate that there is this world out there which is amazing, from which we can learn so much, and of which, of course, we are also a part. We often forget this. We come from there, and this is also our life. And I think if we reconnect and if we redevelop this respect, all the other things come as a present, and will also help, of course, our economies, our societies.
Yes, and the way you describe it, for me, it always then becomes evident is if you have a technological question within your company, or you need to innovate and you got stuck, basically, then it's basically following up your advice. Let's go outside for a couple of days and just figure it out what our challenge is. Because I actually discovered with paper, paper fibers interweave each other naturally in nature. They discover that to have strong paper, you need to weave the fibers, but you cannot weave them because they're fibers, and so they are vibrating them into different layers, and suddenly the paper is strong. And if you look at biomimetics on the nanoscale, you see that layers are always different angles to strengthen things up. Yes. Thank you very much, Ille. I really got excited again today.
Yes, it's good.
Thank you for having time to be on the show.
Yeah.
And talk to you another time.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye.